This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
Hello everybody, and welcome to God is Not Absent, a podcast in which we share stories of faith in the lives of New Zealanders today. This podcast is hosted by me, Apurva Patel-Kana, a young woman who has embarked on her own journey with God and is incredibly curious to know if God really is as dead or absent as many Westerners seem to think. I'm hoping that through this podcast we'll see how vibrant and how real God really is. Because if God really is not absent, well then, that changes everything. Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of God is Not Absent. We hope you've been enjoying your holidays and are ready to get right back into it, whether it's uni or work, but I guess you probably wouldn't have had holidays. But anyway, welcome Nick and Lydia. How are you guys?
Good.
Doing good.
Yeah, doing well. Yep. Great.
Awesome. Yeah, do you guys want to introduce yourselves to the audience a bit, how you guys met and things like that?
Yeah, Lydia, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So Nick and I met in Canada when we were studying for our master's degrees. We both got degrees in linguistics. I got a degree in linguistics plus a bit of Bible translation on top. So we met there, started dating, got married 2 years later.
So, are you Canadian?
No, I'm American, and people often ask me if I'm Canadian, but I'm American.
I was one of those people that asked you if you're Canadian.
Yeah, so Lydia's from North Carolina in the States, but she moved up to Canada like me. I moved from New Zealand up to Canada to do this degree program, and we just happened to meet and really liked each other, and rest is history, I guess. Yeah.
Yep.
Super cool. So I know Nick and Lydia from Kids Camp. So Kids Camp is a church camp for intermediate age kids. So that's like 10 to 13. And it's an awesome camp because we just get to share the gospel and who Jesus is to these amazing kids for a whole week. And Nick and Lydia were camp parents. So they were just supporting the other staff and stuff at camp and just having a lot of fun with the other kids. And I got to hear a bit of your story. So yeah, I thought it was pretty amazing and I'm so excited for you guys to listen to it. So how about we jump right in?
Sounds good.
So, Nick and Lydia, how did you guys first learn about God?
Well, I grew up in a Christian family, and my parents taught me about God, and they were a really great example. They didn't just teach me about who God was, they showed me the importance of relationship with Him, and I think they modeled that really nicely.
And how about you, Nick?
So I was much the same. Like Lydia, I was raised in a Christian family, and so I learned about God from a really young age, and my parents very similarly modeled what it means to have a relationship with God and what it means to have reverence for God and to love God and to honor Him. So yeah, I was raised in that environment.
Awesome. So what key moments do you think led you to trusting in God and making your faith real to yourselves?
Yeah, so I think that the thing about being brought up in a Christian family is some people might assume that we just inherited our faith from our parents. And that's partially true, but it's also true that we made a decision to follow Jesus. And for me, evidence of that is that I grew up with friends who grew up in Christian families as well. And eventually they decided that they didn't want to follow Jesus anymore. So I think while on one hand, their rejection of Jesus is a sad thing. It also shows that someone who grew up in a Christian family also has to make the affirmative. They have to decide to follow Jesus. So I did that.
Yeah, people like us have, in a sense, a conversion story as well, but it's not the same kind of conversion story as someone would have going from non-Christian belief to Christian belief. Instead, you have this journey out of just inheriting beliefs from your parents to instead having beliefs that are your own. So like as Lydia was saying, Christians who just inherit their parents' beliefs generally don't stay Christians because inheriting someone else's beliefs isn't a strong enough foundation on which to go forward in your life. So, I mean, to jump off of what Lydia said, I've had exactly the same kind of situation in my life. Well, it sounds like I'm just copying you, but I've had the same kind of thing in my life where pivotal moments have come where I've said, actually, this is the stand that I want to take, this is the kind of belief that I want to have, and on differences of doctrine, when I've decided to believe something different than my parents, I've thought like, wow, this is a really great moment because it shows that I'm thinking for myself. I'm wanting to be the kind of Christian that I feel is right. I want to understand God as He's revealed Himself to me. Yeah, they're not big differences between me and my parents, but they're just little things that show that I've thought things through for myself and that I'm not just inheriting my parents' beliefs.
Yeah, and I think it's in those hard times when you recommit yourself to God again and again and again, over and over, not just a one-time thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case for all believers, no matter when you started your journey.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you guys think you could expand on certain moments in your life that were those pivotal moments, and what environment were you in? Like, what led you to making that commitment to God?
Yeah, for me, a big moment, and this is a moment I'll probably remember for my whole life. When I was at uni in 2015, I was taking a class called Understandings of Christianity, and it was taught by an atheist. And and he had us read some books, kind of disproving the Christian faith. And it was during that time that one morning I woke up and was like, I don't know if God is real anymore. And it was after that I spent about 2 years in just an identity crisis, in lots of fear and anxiety. It was a really tough time. And God slowly pulled me out of that. But it was in the middle of that dark time, at some of the darkest times, maybe if I can pinpoint it to a particular moment, I can see myself just sitting on the floor and just feeling like I have no evidence for God at all. Even though there is, I felt like there wasn't. And even I didn't feel comforted by the Bible. I didn't feel comforted by other people's beliefs. And I didn't even feel comforted by my own experiences with God. And it was in that moment that I said, you know what, God, you're worth it. And I'm choosing you because I think that your story is the most beautiful story I've ever heard, the most hopeful story I've ever heard. And so for me, that was a moment of dedication. And so now I can look back on that time in my life when I'm doubting God again, if I'm doubting if He exists or if I'm doubting that He's loving or good. And I can think, well, I already decided in that time that I was going to follow Jesus. And I can trust my past self that I did all the hard work at that time, and I don't need to go back to that dark place to figure that out again.
Wow, that's actually so beautiful. Oh my goodness. Why did you take that class?
I had to. It was a required class.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think I totally relate to what you said about how it's the most hopeful story you've heard. Because, I think a moment in which my faith grew was when I realized some of my favorite stories, like Narnia and Lord of the Rings and stuff, they're written by Christians. And I was like, whoa, maybe there's a reason why, my soul just loves these stories. Yeah, it's because, there's something that my heart knows that my head doesn't yet. So, yeah, I think I really resonate with that part of your story. Yeah. Cool. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, again, something similar. I had an experience in high school rather than in university where it was toward the end of my time there. I was in year 13. And throughout my time at high school, I had got a lot of jeers and disparaging comments from friends just because of my faith. And I tended to brush them off. I developed what I thought was a reasonably thick skin. But by year 13, it had all started to catch up with me a bit. And so I went through a journey of trying to discover, like, are these guys right? Is there something to what they're saying? And of course, they didn't have substantial arguments. What they were saying were mostly questions and, things like that. So I went on this journey of trying to answer those questions and to understand what evidential basis there was for my faith. Was there any? And the journey led me to believing that, there's actually a great deal of evidence for my faith. And that to me felt solid, something that I could stand on. And of course, my faith isn't solely based on evidence. I think that the Holy Spirit witnesses to my heart the truth of the Christian gospel, and that's the main way that Christians believe in God and believe in the great things of the gospel, like the resurrection and the atonement and stuff like that. But having this evidence that I could whip out to reassure myself in moments of doubt was really helpful.
So it seems like you guys have had quite a similar journey of there are these external pressures on you to say that God isn't real, that the evidence for God isn't enough, but then you found other pieces of evidence to realize that he is the truth. So I guess my next question would be, what impactful truths have you discovered about God and your faith in the world since your faith became real to you?
Yeah, so the biggest one for me, I think, is just understanding that God is transcendent. So transcendent just means that God is above and beyond everything in the universe. He's close to us, he's with us. Theologians call that God's immanence, but he's also transcendent, so he's beyond us. He's really big, he's eternal. And having that kind of understanding that God is like that has really influenced how I view him. It makes me love him. It makes me think that his majesty is awesome and that he's worthy of worship. And so I think that would be the biggest thing that has spurred me on in my relationship with God, knowing that he's really, 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 really big.
Yeah. How about you, Lydia?
Yeah, so I think a big, whoa moment, like a discovery moment for me, though it's been slow, like a slow discovery, is just that I feel at home in God's presence. And I'll elaborate a little bit on that, or maybe a lot on that.
That's all good.
So when I'm in God's presence, I feel like I would when I'm at home. I feel like I belong. I feel unconditionally loved. And it feels like a familiar, comfortable place. And typically how I connect with God is through musical worship. And so I don't always sense God's presence in musical worship, but sometimes, and when I do, I feel like his spirit is communicating to my spirit wordlessly. But if I had to put it to words, I think that he would be saying things like, I am joy, I am life, I am love, and I love you, and I love you personally, and things like that. And it's also in that place that I just sense his beauty, in all of those things. And I'm a beauty connoisseur. That's one of my favorite things about life is just finding things that are beautiful. And I can say that I have never found anything more beautiful than God's presence. And I think that when Jesus said, abide in me, that he meant make your home in me. Because, the word abide comes from the word abode. And so we're to make our home with him. And I think that it's in his presence that we find that home.
Oh my goodness, that was so, oh man.
Sometimes I joke that Lydia is sort of the beauty person and I'm the truth person. Not exactly that way, but that's how we like to experience God. That's how God is meaningful to us. Lydia loves just sitting in worship and understanding God in the way that he touches her heart and what he reveals to her about his love and his goodness. And I like to read books on theology, and that's how I feel close to God, trying to understand what people have said about who he is, the truths that have been established throughout church history and stuff. So they're different ways of understanding God, but they're both really cool, and it's part of what makes us a good balance, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so cool because, yeah, God is multifaceted, and there are so many different ways that he can connect to different people, and there are so many different sides to him. And I've always thought that, man, like, I wonder if there's a part of God that's like almost like a stranger to me because I connect with him so well in one way, but then, I don't know, not in other ways. And if there are people that are strangers to me, like, that I don't connect with as well, like, maybe that means that there's a side of God that I just can't comprehend. And I think I relate to what you said before about just like how incomprehensible God is and just how majestic and huge he is. So, man, I'm just like loving this conversation. Yeah, so I guess, Lydia, you kind of touched on being in the presence of God and speaking, your spirit speaking to each other wordlessly. Oh, I just love how you said that. I was wondering, what has been both of your experience with prayer, and do you think it works?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean about prayer and if it works. So are we talking about prayer that's like asking God for help for something, or are we talking about prayer that's like communing with God, just spending time with him?
I guess both, because, yeah, I think there are a lot of people that firstly believe that prayer is, it's like asking a genie for something, and if it doesn't happen, then maybe God doesn't exist. So maybe, just talk about your experience with prayer.
Yeah, I can touch on both, and then we'll hear what Nick has to say, because I'm sure he has great things to say.
Thanks.
Yeah, so prayer. When it comes to asking God for help with things, I believe that God cares for us personally, and he's always listening. So I think that kind of answers the question in a way. If he personally cares and he's always listening, then he's going to respond. And so then I would say, yes, prayer does work. And it doesn't always mean that God will give us the things that he wants, but he will respond. And if our desires line up with his desires, I think that's something that would come to pass.
Yeah, God doesn't always give us what we want, but he'll respond to our prayers in the ways that he knows is best. So we're not infinite, we don't know everything, but God does. And so when we pray, I think the main thing that we're doing is communing with God, being in relationship with him and submitting to his will for our lives. And we may ask for this or for that, but the point is that we are there in his presence and saying, whatever happens, I want you to be in control of this situation. So that's the main thing. And then as far as our requests to God go, I think God can, in a sense, look down the barrel of time from eternity past and order the world such that our prayers will be answered in the affirmative if if it's going to be good for us or good for his plan or whatever. So, I think prayer definitely works, but it doesn't always mean God will say yes to you.
I think that is very accurate. Yeah, very good. I was wondering if there were times when, when God hasn't responded in the way that you'd like him to. Maybe you haven't felt his presence as strongly, or maybe he said no to something that you've really wanted. What has been your experience of that, and have you felt that God was loving in that moment, or maybe in hindsight?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind that I haven't shared with anyone is that you're going to get something juicy. When I was in Malaysia in 2016, I spent a couple of months there teaching English, and I had a great time, but I also got really, really homesick because I didn't have a great support network of friends there. And so one day I was just desperately upset, and I asked God if I could see Jesus in the flesh, if he would come and comfort me, and he didn't come.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to think. It sounds a bit silly to ask God for something like that, but I felt disappointed. But through that experience, who knows what God was teaching me? There's no reason to think that a God like the God that we worship would answer that kind of prayer in the affirmative, when perhaps there is good reason why he might not send Jesus in the flesh to me in that particular moment. I mean, that would have a lot of theological ramifications if he did. Yeah. But, God comforted me in other ways in that moment, and through that experience has asked me to trust him and to continue on in faith even in times that are difficult, rather than just him coming in and snatching away the difficulties.
Right. That's a really good note to end on, just snatching away the difficulties. I think I've experienced that as well. I've totally asked God, God, can I just have a hug today? But that doesn't happen. But he comforts us in other ways, you're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How about you, Lydia?
Well, an example from my life is that, before I met Nick, I was in another relationship. Ooh. And in that relationship, I was asking God, I want to marry this person. Would you fix our problems in our relationship? And he didn't. And we broke up, and it was very hard, one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I think what I learned was actually we weren't a good match, and God had something not better in store for me, because
better, much better.
Stop. The other guy, he's another guy, and he's a better match for somebody else. But God had a better match for me in Nick, and I can attest that we really work great together. And I'm very happy to be married to Nick.
Thank you.
This is so cute. Lydia, you're just saying the sweetest things. I just can't.
This is what she's like all the time.
That's so adorable. So guys, we're coming to the end of the episode. But it's okay, because they're going to come back next fortnight for a part 2. As we come to the end of the episode, Nick, could you share a little bit about... So actually, I'll preface that. So one of the reasons why I brought Nick and Lydia here is because they are going to go to Peru to become Bible translators, which is pretty amazing and just so cool what you guys are doing. And so that basically means that, they're going to translate the Bible in a language that it hasn't been translated to yet, so that people can read the Word of God in that language. And Nick, do you want to just share a little bit more about that and how people can support you in your mission and Lydia's mission? Yeah,
so I guess we'll talk about it in more detail next time. But really briefly, what we're doing is going to Peru to work with a people group called the Napo Quichua. There are 32,000 people that live along the Napo River. It heads north from the Amazon, from a city called Iquitos, up into Ecuador. And this people group has the New Testament from previous translation workers, but they don't have an Old Testament yet. So wanting to give them the full story of God in a language that is really meaningful to them, their first language, Lydia and I are going to go and work with the translation team there and help them with producing the Old Testament. So one way that you can support us in doing that is just to pray for us. We need lots of prayer support. And then the second thing that people might want to do is to support us financially, because we need donations to fund the ministry. So if anyone's interested in doing that, they can go to www.towardtranslation.com, and they'll find information on there about how to give or how to pray.
Cool. Thank you so much, Nick. And to finish off the episode, Lydia, would you like to introduce a worship song to us and tell us a little bit about what it means to you?
Yeah, so this song is called After You, and it's by Upper Room. And a lot of the lyrics that you'll hear in this song reflect a lot of what I talked about. The song is about just wanting to know God's heart and to be at home with him in his presence. And then there's this line that I love so much, and it says, you're the most beautiful thing my heart has ever seen. And that is just my heart song for Jesus. So that's why I chose this song.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Well, thanks, guys, for listening. And enjoy the song. We'll see Nick and Lydia next fortnight.
Father, I'm after your heart. Father, I'm seeking your face. You are all that I long for. Would you come fill this place? Just to gaze on your beauty is all I desire. Just to dwell in your presence is all I long for. Father, I'm after your heart. Father, I'm seeking your face. You are all that I long for. Would you come fill this place? Just
Thank you for listening. Tune into our episodes every other Sunday at 12:30 p.m. on Plains FM 96.9. Otherwise, catch us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Remember to stay in touch on our Facebook page at God Is Not Absent. See you guys later in our next episode.